At the peak of the 13th century, one name struck terror into the hearts of millions: the Mongol Empire. From the steppes of Central Asia to the gates of Europe, they were an unstoppable tide of conquest, a juggernaut of horse and bow that had laid waste to entire civilizations. But as the great Khan, Kublai, looked east across the sea, he saw a small island nation that dared to defy him: Japan. When the Khan's envoys arrived demanding tribute, the Japanese response was swift and brutal. They beheaded the messengers. For the samurai, this act was a declaration. There would be no surrender, no negotiation, only war. The stage was set for a cataclysmic collision between two of history's most formidable warrior cultures. On one side, the greatest land empire the world had ever seen, commanding vast armies with unparalleled discipline and ruthless efficiency. On the other, the indomitable spirit of the samurai, a warrior class bound by a strict code of honor and martial prowess. The unstoppable force was about to meet the immovable object. When the Mongol fleet first touched the shores of Hakata Bay in 1274, it wasn't just a battle. It was a total cultural shock. For centuries, the samurai had fought with a strict code of honor, a ritualized form of combat. A warrior would step forward, proudly shout his name, recite his lineage, and challenge a worthy opponent to a one-on-one duel. It was a matter of personal glory and family pride, but the Mongols didn't care for names. They didn't care for honor. They cared only for victory. As the beautifully armored samurai waited for a duel, they were met with a terrifying coordinated rain of poison-tipped arrows. The Mongols fought as a machine, a disciplined collective controlled by the rhythmic beat of drums and the clash of gongs, moving and striking as one single entity. But the most terrifying weapon was something the Japanese had never seen or heard before: the tetsu, or thunder crash bombs. These ceramic shells, packed with gunpowder and shrapnel, exploded with deafening blasts that echoed across the battlefield. The concussive force and the terrifying noise panicked the samurai horses, throwing their riders and shattering their formations. To make matters worse, the Japanese tachi swords, long, elegant, and curved, were designed for cutting unarmored or lightly armored opponents. They began to chip and snap against the thick leather armor and heavy shields of the Mongol infantry. In this brutal clash, the noble ideal of honor was meeting the cold reality of efficiency. And in those first hours, honor was losing. The first invasion of 1274 ended abruptly. Just as the Mongols were establishing a beachhead and pushing the defenders back, a sudden violent storm erupted. Fearing their ships would be wrecked, the Mongol commanders ordered a hasty retreat. The fleet was battered, and a third of their force was lost to the waves. But the Japanese knew this was not a victory, merely a temporary reprieve. They knew the Khan would return, and next time he would bring an even greater force. They had 7 years. 7 years to do the impossible: reinvent their entire way of war. This period of intense innovation became a crucible that forged modern Japan. Japanese blacksmiths, master craftsmen like the legendary Masamune, realized their swords were the weak link. They went back to their forges and revolutionized metallurgy. By folding the steel thousands of times and using differential heat treatment, they created a weapon with 2 souls: a soft, shock-absorbing iron core to prevent it from breaking, and a razor-sharp, hardened steel edge capable of slicing through armor. This was the birth of the modern katana, a blade of unparalleled beauty and lethality, the soul of the samurai. But they didn't just sharpen their blades. Knowing their individual duels were no match for the Mongol horde, they built a massive stone wall, the Genko Borui, spanning 20 kilometers along the most likely landing sites on the coast. It was a simple but ingenious defensive structure. It stood only a couple of meters high, but it was designed for one critical purpose: to rob the Mongol cavalry of their greatest advantage: mobility. The horses couldn't simply charge up the beach and overwhelm the Japanese infantry. They would be trapped, forced into a bloody, close-quarters grind. Japan was no longer just a collection of dueling warriors. It was becoming a unified fortress. The year is 1281. Kublai Khan, enraged by his previous failure, returned with a vengeance. He assembled the largest amphibious invasion fleet in history until World War II. 2 separate fleets, a combined force of over 4,000 ships and more than 140,000 soldiers, descended upon Japan. It was an army meant to erase a nation from the map. But this time the samurai were ready. Behind the stone wall, the newly unified Japanese forces held their ground. The Mongol army, unable to deploy its cavalry effectively, was stuck in a brutal, grinding battle on the beaches. For 2 grueling months, the stalemate held. By day, the Mongols battered the Japanese defenses. But by night, the samurai launched daring raids in small, swift boats. They would glide up to the massive Mongol ships under the cover of darkness, grappling hooks flying, and swarm the decks. In the chaotic, blood-soaked close-quarters combat aboard the ships, the superior reach and cutting power of the new katana proved devastatingly effective. The Mongol invaders were trapped in a bloody stalemate, their massive army confined to their ships and the narrow beachhead. And then, as the summer wore on, the sky turned black. A massive typhoon, born in the heart of the Pacific, turned its fury directly on Hakata Bay. The gods of the wind, it seemed, had answered the desperate prayers of the Japanese people. The storm wasn't just a storm, it was a monster. In the cramped, overcrowded waters of the bay, the Mongol fleet had nowhere to run. The colossal ships, chained together for stability, became a death trap. They were smashed against each other by hurricane-force winds and pulverized against the rocks by mountainous waves. The sound of splintering wood, snapping masts, and the screams of thousands of men was swallowed by the roar of the tempest. By morning, the storm had passed. The sun rose on a scene of utter devastation. The once mighty fleet, the largest the world had ever seen, was a graveyard of wood and iron scattered across the bay. It is estimated that over half the Khan's army, tens of thousands of soldiers, were swallowed by the sea. The survivors who washed ashore were met by the waiting samurai. The invasion was over. The Japanese knelt in the sand, gazing at the wreckage, their hearts filled with awe and gratitude. They believed the gods had intervened to protect their homeland. They called it Kamikaze, the divine wind. The Mongol invasions, and their spectacular failure, changed Japan forever. The crisis forged a new sense of national identity, uniting the various clans against a common enemy. It solidified the samurai as the undisputed ruling class and gave birth to the powerful national myth of the divine wind that protected the sacred islands from foreign invaders, a belief that would echo through Japanese history for centuries. For the Mongol Empire, it was the beginning of the end. It was their first major defeat, a public and humiliating failure that shattered their aura of invincibility. Their relentless expansion, which had consumed continents, was finally halted at the edge of the sea. History is often a story of the strong crushing the weak, of empires marching over all who stand in their way. But sometimes it's a story of how people pushed to the brink can find the strength to innovate and adapt. It's a story of how courage, ingenuity, and a well-timed act of nature can change the destiny of a nation forever. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.